5, 4, dissolve, 3, 6, 2, 1, yours.
A new budget.
KFAI.org. A different radio station every hour. Disabled and Proud is up next.
Media stories about people with disabilities have changed over the years, and Minnesota media have often led the nation in responding to the concerns of the disability community and reporting on the issues that affect them. But still, stories that are intended to be inspirational and moving have often rested on popular misconceptions.
We tend to get stereotyped in the major media. We're either crazy or cripples or brave, and we're just people.
Mostly we saw what are called human interest stories, and they tend to try to draw people's emotions out. And typically the emotion associated with people with disabilities is pity.
Highlighting someone's disability or someone that was just injured, turning that into a pity situation.
There for the grace of God go I, there's so much of that.
Not surprising, since our attitude toward disability has been shaped by decades of media events like the annual Labor Day telethon.
I grew up watching the telethon thinking Jerry was my savior. Oh my goodness, he was gonna cure me and I was gonna walk again. I would say one of the significant things for me was exposure to a periodical called the Disability Rag, which is now the Ragged Edge, and started reading about the telethon and how problematic it was in that it really created the attitude of pity. They were using children and parading them across the stage.
I think that we used to do stories a lot more that were more charity stories. It's like, here's a guy who can play basketball in a wheelchair.
And then they've always got to portray the person with a disability as either superhuman or doing something really courageous.
They somehow prove that their disability didn't matter. If you're a blind man who tried to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, or you were a man with a prosthetic leg and you tried to run across Canada, those were the people that got attention. That somehow they made us feel better.
A lot of times reporters will do oh, they're so courageous because you have a disability, or, this person has overcome great odds, and it's, no, we're just living, and these are obstacles in our way and we need to move past them.
People with disabilities aren't just those heroes or those people who rise and walk when there's 5 minutes left with the Family Channel movie of the week, that doesn't happen in reality.
I just hate it when we're portrayed as courageous, because most of us just do what we need to do to get through.
While editors and media producers may have had good intentions, stories that portrayed people with disabilities as either pathetic or inspirational actually made it more difficult for them to go about their lives.
People with disabilities start saying, wait a minute, that's not my life. If you tell the story of me as someone who is incapable, that's going to hurt me down the road, because what employer is going to hire me? Who's going to think of me as being an equal part of society if they think that that I'm just someone to be pitied and someone who can't do things?
As long as we are intent on having swelling string music in the background when we're talking about people with disabilities who have overcome tremendous odds and obstacles, there's a separateness to that, there's an otherness to that underneath that, I think, is something that says, thank goodness that's not me.
At the same time, investigative journalists, particularly in Minnesota, have been instrumental in advancing the cause of equal rights for people with disabilities. Starting in the 1940s and culminating in the 70s, journalists reported on the horrible condition of state institutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
In 1965, Sam Newland from the Trib went down to Faribault and just went into Dakota Building and started taking pictures. And the pictures show children, guys, teenagers, lying on the stairwell, lying on the benches, lying on the floor with nothing to do.
Similar stories began to appear across the country, revealing the conditions in which we had warehoused our most vulnerable citizens. These exposés, in concert with strong advocacy by groups like the ARC, led to the closing of these large public institutions. And in the years that followed, Minnesota journalists remained alert to the abuses in the system.
Institutions had closed down, and I started seeing all these mini institutions ringing suburbia in group homes. And I said, what's different here? So I wanted to take a look at that.
So in the 1990s, the Star Tribune was again exposing disturbing events in the care of Minnesotans with developmental disabilities.
I came across reports that showed people died from neglect and abuse.
But even as the media championed reform, they continued unknowingly to make assumptions and to use language that made it more difficult for people with disabilities to participate fully in their communities.
A handicapped person was robbed at gunpoint. A crippled man was beaten. That was language we used. That was common language we used.
Oh my gosh, people love using the term crippled.
Confined to a wheelchair is my personal favorite.
Words that depict people with disabilities as victims, sufferers, and sad figures, either in the media or in daily use, send a message of exclusion.
The one that makes me bristle more than anything is when somebody just says, oh, you're acting retarded.
When the word retard is used, even in a joke, the focus of what people see changes. People see a disability, not a human being with feelings like theirs.
So our choice of words really does matter.
Crazy, insane, demented. Pretty much the images that you get in the media are that people with a mental illness are violent. And actually, it's a very, very tiny percentage of people with a serious mental illness that are violent. People with a mental illness are far more likely to be victims than perpetrators.
It does go to language. You know, even do you call a person with a disability a patient all the time? Or are they sometimes a consumer, a client, a neighbor? You know, I mean, it's not all in the context of a condition or a diagnosis. You know, it needs to be in the broader context of somebody's whole life.
Today, many more journalists and media outlets are more careful about making assumptions and understand that to get the real story, they need to listen to the disability community.
It wasn't that we became enlightened. It was because those people in those communities with these disabilities found their voices, and they spoke up.
The disabled people themselves have redefined what it means to be disabled.
A great example is Access Press. Founded in 1990 in the midst of a swelling grassroots movement that led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Access Press was among the first disability-focused newspapers in the country.
The movement was crescendoing, and there was a lot happening, and so there needed to be an organ, a way to communicate with a community that also needed to congeal and to identify themselves so that they could continue to assert political and social power.
When the paper was first founded 22 years ago, we didn't have email. We didn't have websites. We needed something to connect the community, and Charlie understood that.
Charlie Smith, disability activist and founding editor of Access Press, exemplified the aspirations and determination of the disability community.
Charlie was irreverent, had an offbeat sense of humor, and was not about to accept the conditions that he had been handed.
I thought, wow, who is this guy? He's got all this charisma, and he was just so frank with, questioning the legislators, and he did it in such a matter-of-fact way. He said it in this Minnesota nice way, but yet with a knife.
One of the values of Access Press is that it moves people away from victimhood into actors, into activists, that this isn't just something that's done to me. Damn it, I can do something about this. And it's not just me. Look at, there's this community. And that's communicated in the newspaper.
Over more than 2 decades, Access Press published nearly 5,000 feature articles, reporting on the issues most important to Minnesotans with disabilities.
If I want to know something about a disability-related subject, my first source is Access Press.
You know, it just helps to frame the questions that policymakers and providers of services should be responding to.
That's how social change happens, continues to happen, and it also gets information out to people to educate them about what is going on.
What I love about publications that focus on disability issues is they focus on the facts, they focus on what's going on. They don't get caught up in the emotional aspect of disability.
It does a very good job of reminding us that we are not one monolithic group of people. There are individuals with mental health issues, individuals with disabilities they were born with, individuals that have acquired disabilities like mine.
Legislators, as well as news people, they think if they speak with one person with disability, they're speaking with all people with disabilities, and that just really isn't so.
30 years ago, we weren't nearly as good as we are today, I think. You did end up with many experts talking on their behalf.
We also have influence by making the case that many of us have or will have disabilities, and this is news all media should be covering.
I don't think you can minimize in any way the contribution that has been made by Access Press and those type of publications that focus on disability news, because they have presented the real story.
I think that's where advocacy journalism can really come through, with people telling their stories and saying, this is about us and this is how it affects us.
Charlie was a huge source of information for me. He was 21, I was 21, and he'd already been injured for 4 years or so. Charlie was a big part of my learning to be a quadriplegic.
How much social change happened because of not only him, but of the coverage that took place in Access Press.
During the 1970s, Charlie Smith was one of a new generation of activists who were learning to use the media in their fight for independent housing, accessibility, transportation, employment, and voting rights.
We used media in organizing for rights in group homes, for workers' rights.
Hourly wage paid by most American employers is $2.90. That's the law. But there are employers who pay their workers half that and even less. We are talking about places called sheltered workshops.
The question has to be asked, does the government think that these people are people, that these salaries?
We felt that we had the same right as everybody else.
In 1972, Charles Van Hevelen made the case that if polling places weren't accessible, then people with disabilities were being denied a fundamental right.
So we drafted a bill in the 1972 legislation that made all polling places accessible.
Because of the work of advocates and activists, the Minnesota Human Rights Act was amended in 1973 to include people with disabilities, 17 years before the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Across the country, the movement for equal rights for people with disabilities gained strength. In 1988, 2 years before the passage of the ADA, students at Gallaudet University, the world's first school of advanced education for deaf and hard of hearing students, demanded appointment of a deaf president and made national headlines.
I think that's the first time that Americans thought about disability and civil rights going together. The students got angry and they shut down the university and they protested and they said, why don't we have a president who is deaf and can better understand our issues? And that led to the Board of Trustees reversing itself, and I. King Jordan, a deaf man and an administrator and teacher at Gallaudet, became that president.
Then, in 1990, after decades of struggle, came passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
I couple Access Press and the ADA as really part of the same movement.
Passage of the ADA was a significant milestone, but it was not the end of the fight. The disability rights movement continues, as does the struggle for media attention.
The only way ADA is going to be implemented in both at the national level and in communities where people live is if, once again, people with disabilities have a strong presence are organized, are fighting for themselves and putting the pressure on.
Competition for the pages of the Star Tribune or the 30-second clip on the nightly news is tough. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to lay the groundwork for those kinds of stories.
History is created by ordinary people and movements, and the mainstream media doesn't want to report about that.
Until his death in 2001, Charlie Smith continued to use Access Press to educate, fight stereotypes, and open minds.
With ADA, it's making a lot of people aware of people with disabilities. But the key is going to be, can we change people's attitudes about people with disabilities? You know, that they're employable, that they go on vacation, that they're dateable or sexual, or, you know, the variety of everybody.
What he did for the disability community is pretty incredible. And I think he died way too young.
In the 20 years since Charlie founded Access Press, the media world has changed a lot. And corporate sponsors of media content have played an ever-increasing role in forming public opinion on issues related to disability. And more often, the voices of the disability community are being heard.
Being disabled doesn't make who you are. It's just part of who you are.
Disability isn't a negative. It's just part of life.
Being a disabled woman is part of who I am, and so it's something that I can embrace as a part of my identity, that I can feel okay and even proud about.
I would never say that I'm a disabled person. I'm a person with a disability. My disability doesn't define who I am. I often go through most of my days and I don't even think about having a disability. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I work full-time. Often only think about my disability when I encounter barriers in life or an attitude that don't allow me to do the things that I need to do in the course of my daily living.
So those people are in our families, those are people we know, those are people that hopefully we work with. That's helped to educate reporters.
We represent 20% of the population. We are a significant portion of this community, and our issues are very real issues.
I think we need to impress upon our media that we're part of the buying public, that we're part of the public. We're part of the demographic that watches the 10 o'clock news. A lot of our folks who are coming on the show have disabilities themselves, and whereby you might get a minute and 30 seconds on the news like everybody else. And this way, we might have 8 minutes, you know, which is, in television, as you know, is a lot of time. And so we can cover things in depth.
Clearly, it makes sense to let people speak for themselves. Being a self-advocate is a benchmark now of the community in which we live, that people are encouraged to speak out for themselves. And television can do a really effective job of amplifying those voices.
This is how it works. This is how your knowledge or your information is spread.
We are a sponsor for KFAI Radio's Disabled and Proud programming.
More and more programs are popping up that have a slant on disability topics. We try to cover anything that pertains to disabilities. I think it matters to both the disability community and in the non-disability community.
I think radio is one of those media that really promotes empathy, and what I'm trying to show in my work is the humanity of the people who are telling these stories.
There are two ways to see my sister. Probably if you've never met her before, you'll see her and you'll see she's only 4'4" and she's in a wheelchair. But let me tell you some other things about my sister.
Sherry told this very moving story about her younger sister being institutionalized when she was 4 years old and Susie was 3.
Sherry Gray says part of what the ADA helped do was make it possible for her sister to rejoin the world outside.
Sherry was able to talk about the relationship she has with her sister and really how the outside world had changed to make a place for her sister to come.
We have a campaign that was called Ability, and it focused on individuals that we serve and their abilities rather than looking at the challenges. They are part of our overall community and they're shown in our brand advertising thing. And it was just common sense to us that they would be part of that campaign.
Gillette's Cure Pity program is fabulous.
We're known throughout the world for the services that we provide, and with that, we think comes a responsibility to help people better understand children who have disabilities.
And the commercials in particular, I think, resonate beautifully. I mean, show kids doing what kids do, regardless of their disability.
At WCCO, Darcy Poland was one of the few quadriplegic TV news reporters in the country.
You could put her on a light fluff piece, and she would return with a story that would make you laugh out loud. And then you could put her on a serious piece, and then you'd see a Darcy that people didn't recognize.
The State Department of Human Services denied Valerie's request to reinstate her license back in December.
She could drill down better than any reporter that I ever found. I can't think of anything that she was not able to do, that we had to accommodate for. Oh, don't send Darcy on that story because she won't be able to do that. She would have despised anyone who would have suggested that she couldn't have run that cart in the snowdrifts.
Ken Barlow, meteorologist at KSTP, made news when he spoke publicly about living with bipolar disorder.
The Pioneer Press did a very large story about it, and frankly, how difficult it was for him to reveal that about himself. And the nice thing is that all he has gotten is positive responses, that people have said, thank you for sharing your story.
News coverage of returning vets disabled in Iraq and Afghanistan have further contributed to a better understanding of disability issues.
My husband has mental health issues and PTSD. He's a combat vet.
When I first started doing stories about PTSD, I always had to say post-traumatic stress disorder because the assumption was not everybody knew what PTSD stood for. That changed by 2005 because those troops back from Iraq and Afghanistan have been willing to stand up and say, look, this is the issue that we have, this is the treatment we're not getting.
And as awareness increases, reporters are realizing that there are a lot of straight news stories that have a disability component.
I was listening to NPR, and they were talking about housing. The NPR reporter brought up accessibility.
It's come up a couple times now. I mean, are there homes in this prefab spirit that are handicap accessible, that do fit needs of the non-traditional small home owner?
Really appropriate and something that reporters should be doing is just taking a typical story like parking, like housing, like employment, and incorporating the disability aspect into it.
In some ways, disability has gone mainstream. More often now, reporters doing a straight news piece don't feel it necessary to spotlight someone just because they have a disability.
Now, it's not unusual for just to write normal everyday stories, barely mentioning that someone has a disability. If it's not pertinent to the story, we don't even mention it.
Put away the old biases of the hero issues and look at the person, look at the story, and treat it as a straight news story.
When we can see people in media stories as employees, as husbands, as friends, and there is no mention of their disability, there is nothing inspirational about them whatsoever, I think we'll be fine.
Many more of us will find we have a greater interest in disability issues simply because we've lived long enough.
You know, when we would talk about who's going to benefit from these accessibility changes, people would think, oh, just a handful of people were going to benefit. But then as the baby boomers started to age and take advantage, you know, they love our grab bars. They love our parking.
Baby boomers are aging. It's already tough to find those accessible places. It's going to get even tougher unless we plan for it.
Irv Zola, the sociologist at Brandeis, who was a polio survivor, said that disability is the one minority group that we can all become a member of at any time. We're all just one banana peel away from joining the disability civil rights movement.
The disability rights movement continues to press forward on a number of fronts: employment, penny-wise, pound-foolish budget cuts, and accessibility. And for that reason, there is still a need for investigative journalists to step in and take up the fight. Charles Van Hevelen, the activist we met earlier, has been working for St. Paul Public Schools for 20 years. When he discovered that he'd be forced to retire at age 65 and lose the benefits that allowed him to live independently, he wrote to legislators, 200 of them, and got no response. And so Charles used the media, first creating a YouTube video.
Chuck actually contacted me last year about this issue. He was going to lose his job because of the way the law was set up, and not only that, he would have to spend down all of his savings and lose his pension, and basically would end up losing his condo. I had a hard time believing that this could be the case, that in Minnesota we basically would force someone into poverty so that they could have health care.
Lose my condo, I lose all my credit rates, I'll be forced into public housing or a nursing home until death. This will cost the state more money than the president spending.
And it was a personal story that had wide ramifications across the state of Minnesota.
I just thought John did a really good job of giving the issues and why it seemed unfair. I think it was just a good example of how sometimes it doesn't make sense. The rules just don't make sense.
After John Tevelin's story appeared in the Star Tribune, WCCO picked it up.
In February, we told you the story of Charles Van Hevelen and how he was being forced to retire if he wanted to continue to get health insurance from the state.
First of all, it was a front page article in Access Press. And so again, Access Press could alert the mainstream media.
Charles was enrolled in a program called Medical Assistance for Employed Persons with a Disability. MAEPD helps him afford a personal care attendant and a condo adapted to his needs. It was all going to go away when he turned 65 in May. That is, until a bill was passed to restore $18 million in funding to Health and Human Services.
That did play an important role in setting the context for the passage of legislation, which people had written off for dead.
Charles Van Hevelen's story illustrates the power of the media to affect positive change, to be an advocate for equal rights, and to shape public opinion and attitudes. The media, that mix of constantly shifting voices, images, words, and music, is a potent cultural force for good or ill. As far as the disability community is concerned, we're seeing clear progress, greater understanding, and new respect. But is it realistic to expect the mainstream media to cover disability issues with the breadth and depth we demand? Grassroots, community-based media plays a critical role in providing current information and first-person accounts, ensuring we move beyond the stereotypes and report the real story.